4:52 a.m., Laredo, Texas. Federal agents breach a warehouse complex and discover what no one was prepared to find. Not a stash house, not a hidden compartment, an underground tunnel stretching 1,400 feet beneath American soil, wide enough to move industrial pallets, reinforced with concrete and steel, operating undetected for years. 273 arrests across 5 states, 52 tons of narcotics, a cartel-owned logistics empire posing as legitimate American commerce. This wasn't a drug bust. This was the collapse of infrastructure built to feed addiction into every corner of the nation. Hit like right now so this story reaches the people who need to see how deep corruption runs beneath the surface we trust. The investigation began not with a tip, but with a pattern. 18 months earlier, analysts inside a DEA intelligence unit in Houston noticed something that made no sense. Overdose rates in rural counties across Texas, New Mexico, and Oklahoma were spiking in synchronized waves, not gradually, not randomly, in clusters. Emergency rooms in towns separated by hundreds of miles reported the same phenomenon within days of each other. Pure methamphetamine flooding streets that had seen nothing but low-grade product for years. The purity levels were identical. The packaging was identical. The timing was identical. Epidemics don't move with that kind of precision. Supply chains do. Investigators began tracing backwards. Hospital admissions cross-referenced with transportation logs, commercial vehicle routes, freight delivery schedules. A pattern emerged. Every spike in overdoses corresponded to increased activity along specific interstate corridors. Not trafficking routes in the traditional sense, legitimate logistics routes. Trucks carrying produce, refrigerated goods, consumer products. Vehicles that passed every inspection, drivers with spotless records, companies with federal certifications, and contracts with America's largest retailers. One name appeared more frequently than any other: Lone Star Regional Transport, a mid-sized logistics firm based outside Houston, operating for 12 years, employing 400 drivers, maintaining contracts with Walmart, Target, and Kroger. On paper, it was the model of American efficiency. Behind that facade, federal agents would later discover a narcotics distribution network generating $800 million annually. By October, surveillance teams had been deployed to 6 locations across Texas. Undercover agents photographed vehicle movements, logged shift changes, tracked shipping manifests. Thermal imaging revealed unusual heat signatures beneath a warehouse complex in Laredo. Structural engineers were brought in to analyze blueprints filed with the city. The dimensions didn't match. The foundation was too deep. The ventilation systems were too sophisticated for standard cold storage. Something was moving beneath that facility that was never meant to be seen. On November 14th, a federal judge in the Western District of Texas signed 63 simultaneous search warrants. The operation was designated Timberline. Coordination involved FBI, DEA, ICE Homeland Security Investigations, ATF, U.S. Marshals, and Texas Department of Public Safety. More than 800 federal agents mobilized across Houston, Laredo, El Paso, Dallas, and San Antonio.
The raids were scheduled for 4:52 a.m. on a Friday morning. Pre-dawn darkness, minimal civilian traffic, maximum tactical advantage. At exactly 4:52 a.m., engines roared to life across 5 cities. Convoys of unmarked SUVs, tactical vehicles, and armored trucks moved simultaneously toward predetermined targets. No sirens, no lights, radio silence until breach. In Laredo, the lead vehicle smashed through the reinforced gates of a warehouse complex that had passed city inspections for 7 consecutive years. Flashbangs detonated, commands echoed across concrete. Agents in tactical gear swept through loading bays, offices, refrigerated storage units. Workers were ordered to the ground, hands zip-tied, rights read in rapid succession. Inside the main warehouse, nothing appeared unusual. Pallets of avocados, crates of tomatoes, refrigeration units humming at regulation temperatures, standard logistics operations. But the canine units knew better. 3 dogs sat simultaneously near the southwest corner of the facility, refusing commands to move. Handlers signaled the breach team. Bolt cutters were retrieved. A concealed door, flush with the wall, painted to match surrounding steel panels, was forced open. Behind it, a staircase descended into darkness. What agents discovered next would redefine the scope of the entire investigation. Not a crude drug smuggling passage, an engineered subterranean corridor, stretching 1,400 feet from the warehouse to an unregistered industrial property near the Rio Grande. The walls were reinforced concrete, the ceiling supported by steel I-beams. LED lighting ran the entire length, ventilation systems maintained airflow. Electric carts sat on rails designed for rapid cargo transport. This was not improvisation. This was industrial infrastructure, built with the precision of a mining operation, constructed over years without triggering a single municipal permit review. One agent, a 17-year FBI veteran, stood at the entrance staring into the tunnel's depths. He didn't speak for a full minute. When he finally did, his voice was quiet, but the disbelief was absolute. This is cartel engineering on American soil. The tunnel was functional, active, and until 4:52 a.m., completely invisible. If this shocks you, imagine what remains hidden beneath facilities that have never been searched. Tap like to push this investigation into the light where it belongs. While the tunnel team secured the underground corridor, simultaneous raids were unfolding across Texas. In Houston, agents breached the corporate headquarters of Lone Star Regional Transport. Glass doors shattered, executives in tailored suits forced onto polished marble floors, servers yanked from racks while still warm, hard drives seized, phones confiscated. Financial records spanning 12 years loaded into evidence vans within 40 minutes. In Dallas, a fleet maintenance facility was surrounded. Mechanics working the early shift found themselves face down on grease-stained concrete as agents swarmed hydraulic bays and tool storage units. What they uncovered was a modification operation disguised as routine truck maintenance. 17 refrigerated semi-trucks were seized on site. Each one had been structurally altered. Floors reinforced with hidden compartments, hydraulic lifts installed beneath cargo bays, false walls constructed inside refrigeration units. The modifications were sophisticated enough to pass standard DOT inspections. Weight distribution calibrated to avoid triggering sensors, thermal signatures masked by legitimate refrigeration systems. Only advanced imaging equipment or physical dismantling could reveal what lay beneath the surface. These were not smuggling vehicles. These were purpose-built narcotics transport platforms designed to operate within America's logistics infrastructure without detection. By 6:30 a.m., the scale of the seizures became clear. In Laredo, agents moving through the tunnel discovered 3 staging areas carved into the walls. Each one contained industrial shelving stacked with narcotics, methamphetamine in vacuum-sealed bricks, fentanyl pills in pharmaceutical-grade packaging, cocaine compressed into kilo blocks, heroin in powder form labeled with batch numbers like inventory in a distribution warehouse. The total weight recovered from the tunnel alone exceeded 8 tons. Black market value, $240 million. In El Paso, a secondary warehouse linked to the same network was breached simultaneously. Agents found no drugs. Instead, they found documents. Ledgers detailing shipments going back 9 years, routing schedules, payment records, offshore account numbers, names. The names were the most dangerous discovery of all. 12 individuals employed by federal and state agencies with direct oversight of transportation, logistics, and border security. Some held administrative positions, others worked in inspection divisions. One was a senior analyst inside a regional DEA office. The pattern was consistent. Each official had received payments ranging from $18,000 to $75,000 over multiple years, not large enough to trigger federal reporting thresholds, not frequent enough to establish obvious patterns. Payments routed through shell consulting firms, real estate transactions, and offshore entities registered in Panama, the Cayman Islands, and Belize. In exchange, these officials provided advance notice of inspections, removed flagged vehicles from watch lists, delayed warrant approvals, ensured certain trucks were waved through checkpoints without secondary screening. This was not corruption in the traditional sense. This was institutional protection. Comment betrayed if you believe officials who sell their oath deserve the maximum penalty the law allows. By midday, arrests began in waves. Drivers were taken into custody at rest stops, fueling stations, and loading docks across 5 states. Most had no idea they were part of a criminal enterprise. They believed they worked for a legitimate company. They had commercial licenses, they paid taxes, they supported families. When shown evidence of hidden compartments in their vehicles, many broke down. Others stared in silence. A 62-year-old driver from Oklahoma wept when agents explained what he had been transporting beneath crates of lettuce for 3 years. He had driven over 900,000 miles without incident. He had received safety awards. He had believed in the system. But not all drivers were innocent. Federal investigators identified 37 individuals who were fully aware of the operation. These were cartel operatives embedded inside the logistics workforce. They communicated using encrypted apps. They coordinated delivery schedules with distribution cells in target cities. They received bonuses tied to successful shipments.
When raids began, several attempted to flee. U.S. Marshals tracked them using cell tower data and vehicle GPS systems. By evening, all but 2 were in federal custody. The remaining suspects were apprehended within 72 hours. As the sun set on the first day, the evidence began piling up in federal warehouses. 52 tons of methamphetamine, 1.7 million fentanyl pills, 600 kilograms of cocaine, 200 kilograms of heroin. Street value, $2 billion. In addition, agents seized 47 vehicles, including modified semi-trucks, cargo vans, and sedans used for reconnaissance. 12 properties were placed under federal forfeiture proceedings. Bank accounts holding $112 million were frozen across 6 countries. But the financial trail was just beginning. Forensic accountants spent weeks reconstructing the money network. What they uncovered was a masterpiece of criminal finance. Lone Star Regional Transport was not the only entity involved. It was the centerpiece of a constellation of shell companies, freight brokers, maintenance firms, insurance agencies, real estate holdings. Each one appeared legitimate on paper. Each one filed taxes. Each one held licenses. Together, they formed a closed-loop system designed to launder proceeds while maintaining the appearance of lawful commerce. Narcotics revenue entered the system as cash payments to low-level distributors. That cash was deposited into accounts controlled by freight brokers who issued invoices for non-existent shipments. Lone Star Transport paid those invoices using funds from legitimate contracts with major retailers. The freight brokers transferred money to offshore consulting firms, which then invested in real estate, luxury vehicles, and art. The assets were later sold at a loss, generating clean funds that re-entered the United States as investment capital. The cycle repeated continuously over 12 years. Analysts estimate the network laundered more than $800 million using this exact structure. Not a single transaction triggered an automatic federal review. The human cost, however, could not be measured in dollars. Using shipping data recovered from seized servers, analysts cross-referenced delivery routes with public health records. The results were devastating. Between 2016 and 2024, counties serviced by Lone Star Transport reported over 380,000 methamphetamine-related overdoses. Of those, 96,000 were fatal. Towns with populations under 15,000 saw overdose rates increase by 73% within 2 years of Lone Star establishing regular delivery routes. Emergency rooms overwhelmed. Foster care systems collapsed. Entire families disintegrated. One county in rural Oklahoma recorded 42 overdose deaths in a single year. Population, 7,000. That's a death rate 6 times the national average. Investigators later confirmed that Lone Star trucks made weekly deliveries to a distribution hub just outside city limits. The methamphetamine moved from the hub into the community within hours. Purity levels consistently above 90%. Prices low, availability constant. The town didn't stand a chance. Share this video. They counted on silence, and exposure is the only weapon communities have against networks this embedded. As the investigation expanded, the institutional rot became impossible to ignore. 12 officials had been named in the ledgers. By the end of week 2, that number had grown to 19. Some resigned before charges were filed. Others were arrested at their desks. A senior logistics coordinator for the Texas Department of Transportation was taken into custody during a budget meeting. A border enforcement supervisor was arrested at his home while his children watched from the driveway. An analyst inside a regional DEA office was escorted out in handcuffs during a morning briefing. Each one had played a role. Some provided intelligence, others manipulated databases. A few simply delayed action long enough for shipments to clear checkpoints. The payments were modest. The consequences were catastrophic. Federal prosecutors described the conspiracy as a systematic dismantling of institutional integrity. These were not rogue actors, they were individuals who made calculated decisions to prioritize money over duty. In doing so, they enabled a network that poisoned communities, destroyed families, and shattered trust in the very systems designed to protect the public. The tunnel itself became a symbol, not just of criminal ingenuity, but of what happens when corruption goes unchecked. Engineers who examined the structure estimated it cost between $8 million and $12 million to construct. The materials alone, concrete, steel beams, ventilation equipment, electrical systems, required coordination with suppliers, contractors, and laborers, none of whom reported suspicious activity, none of whom questioned the project's purpose. Either they were complicit or they didn't ask. The tunnel had entry and exit points on both sides of the border. The Mexican side led to a warehouse controlled by the Sinaloa cartel's logistics division. Cross-border coordination required real-time communication between American operatives and cartel commanders in Culiacan. Encrypted phones recovered during the raids contained thousands of messages detailing shipment schedules, vehicle modifications, and bribe payments. One message, sent 3 weeks before the raid, was chilling in its casualness. Friday delivery confirmed, route clear, payment received. No code words, no elaborate encryption, just business as usual, because for years it had been. Prosecutors began building cases immediately. Federal indictments were issued for 273 individuals across 5 states. Charges ranged from conspiracy to traffic narcotics, money laundering, obstruction of justice, and corruption of public officials. The most severe charges carried mandatory life sentences without possibility of parole. 19 public officials faced additional counts of abuse of public trust and receiving bribes. Several entered plea agreements within weeks, providing testimony against higher-level operatives. Others refused to cooperate. Their trials would stretch for months, revealing layer after layer of institutional compromise. One former border inspector, testifying under immunity, described the culture of complicity. You didn't have to be actively corrupt, you just had to be willing not to see. And if you did see, you had to be willing not to act. That's how it worked. That statement captured the essence of the entire operation. It wasn't maintained by cartels alone, it was maintained by silence, willful ignorance, and the quiet erosion of duty. The aftermath was brutal for the communities most affected.
Rural counties that had been saturated with methamphetamine for years faced a paradoxical crisis. Overdoses continued even after the supply was cut off. Because addiction doesn't disappear when the pipeline closes, it just shifts. Users who had become dependent on high-purity product turned to whatever was available. Street-level dealers filled the void with lower quality, more dangerous substitutes. Overdose rates didn't drop immediately. In some counties, they spiked. Public health officials scrambled to expand treatment programs. Emergency rooms remained overwhelmed. Families continued to bury loved ones. One county coroner in West Texas spoke to federal investigators 3 months after the raids. "We thought shutting down the supply would save lives. It did, eventually, but the damage was already done. These people aren't numbers, they're neighbors, they're parents, and we lost too many before help arrived." That's the cost of infrastructure like this. Not just the drugs, not just the money, the human wreckage left behind. The tunnel was sealed with concrete 2 months after the raids. Engineers filled the entire 1,400-foot corridor to prevent future use. But sealing one tunnel doesn't eliminate the strategy. Federal intelligence reports indicate at least 6 additional subterranean corridors may exist along the Texas-Mexico border. Some suspected, others confirmed through geophysical surveys, but not yet breached. The Lone Star Regional Transport Network was not unique. It was a model, and models get replicated. Law enforcement officials now face a new reality. Cartels are not just smuggling drugs, they're building infrastructure. They're embedding themselves in legitimate commerce. They're recruiting from within American institutions, and they're doing it with a level of sophistication that blurs the line between criminal enterprise and corporate operation. If you've made it this far, drop a comment with "expose" if you believe these systems should be dragged into the light no matter how deep they're buried. The investigation also exposed vulnerabilities in federal oversight. How does a logistics company operate for 12 years, maintain contracts with Fortune 500 retailers, and move 52 tons of narcotics without detection? The answer is uncomfortable, because oversight systems are designed to process volume, not scrutiny. Lone Star Regional Transport filed taxes, passed inspections, held certifications, employed hundreds of people with clean records. It looked like every other mid-sized logistics firm in America, and that was the point. Federal regulators responsible for vetting transportation companies are understaffed, underfunded, and overwhelmed. Inspections are infrequent, audits are rare, background checks are limited. As long as paperwork is in order and no red flags are raised, companies move through the system with minimal friction. Cartels have learned to exploit that friction, or rather, the lack of it. They don't need to avoid the system, they just need to blend into it. And when corruption provides a safety net, blending becomes easy. Emergency reforms followed quickly. The Department of Transportation announced new protocols for vetting logistics companies with federal contracts. Random vehicle inspections increased by 40% along southern border corridors. Enhanced imaging technology was deployed at key checkpoints. The DEA expanded its intelligence sharing program with state and local agencies to identify patterns in overdose data. But policy changes can't undo the deeper lesson. The Lone Star Network succeeded not because it was hidden, but because it was believed. People saw a successful logistics company. They saw jobs. They saw contracts with trusted retailers. And because that story fit comfortably into the narrative of American commerce, no one questioned the foundation it was built on. That comfort was the weapon, and it worked for over a decade. Share this so more people understand how corruption doesn't always look like crime. Sometimes it looks like success. The final pieces of evidence were cataloged in silence. Forensic teams spent months processing the warehouse, the tunnel, the vehicles, and the financial records. What they documented was a portrait of meticulous control. The Lone Star Network had been designed like a corporation: hierarchies, operational divisions, performance metrics, quality control. Shipments were tracked with the same precision as Amazon logistics, delivery times optimized, routes analyzed, efficiency measured. Drivers received bonuses for on-time performance. Warehouse workers had quotas. Management held quarterly reviews. It was a business, a highly profitable, deeply embedded, lethally effective business. And that's what made it so dangerous. Because when crime is organized, professional, and patient, it doesn't trigger alarms, it triggers respect. The Lone Star Network didn't need violence to protect itself, it needed credibility. And for years, it had both. By the time case files were compiled, they totaled over 18,000 pages. Evidence logs, financial statements, surveillance transcripts, testimony from cooperating witnesses, shipping records, inspection reports, emails. Every document told the same story from a different angle. This was not an accident, this was design. Prosecutors prepared for trials that would span years. Defense attorneys argued entrapment, procedural errors, insufficient evidence of intent. But the tunnel didn't lie. The ledgers didn't lie. The 52 tons of narcotics didn't lie. And the 96,000 fatal overdoses linked to this network left no room for interpretation. The Lone Star Regional Transport Operation had built a narcotics empire inside the American logistics system. It had corrupted officials, it had weaponized legitimacy, and it had almost succeeded in making it permanent. Almost. As federal agents stood in the sealed tunnel months later, one investigator reflected on what had been uncovered. This wasn't just about drugs, it was about trust. They took something we rely on, logistics, commerce, infrastructure, and turned it into a weapon. And the scariest part? We almost didn't see it. That's the warning this case leaves behind. The next network might not be in Texas, it might not use tunnels, it might not be called Lone Star, but the blueprint is the same. Embed in legitimate systems, corrupt key officials, move product with precision, maintain appearances, and count on the fact that people trust what looks successful. The raids stopped the operation, but they didn't stop the strategy. Because somewhere, right now, another network is being built, another tunnel is being dug, another logistics company is being created. And until oversight catches up with ingenuity, the cycle will continue.
If this investigation shook you, if it made you realize how easily trust can be weaponized and systems can be hollowed out, then do something. Share this video, comment, expose. Let more people see what happens when oversight is optional and corruption is profitable. Because the Lone Star Network is gone, but the conditions that created it are not. The next fortress might be under a different name, in a different state, with a different cover story, but the threat is the same. And the only defense communities have is awareness, vigilance, and the refusal to accept that success always equals legitimacy. The federal agents who brought this network down didn't do it for recognition. They did it because someone had to. Because when systems fail, when officials look the other way, when institutions become shields instead of safeguards, the only thing standing between predators and the public is people willing to act. This case is a warning, not about foreign cartels or distant borders, but about what can be built inside your own infrastructure when no one is watching. And the most dangerous part? It doesn't look like danger. It looks like commerce, until the bodies start piling up, until the overdoses become epidemics, until a thermal camera reveals what was moving beneath the surface all along. Power doesn't always need violence. Sometimes it only needs camouflage. And the Lone Star Network had both, until the day the silence broke and the tunnel collapsed.